Good morning and welcome to the NNC News. Today's topic is going to be the environmental crises that are currently affecting the Baltic Sea, such as algal blooming and environmental toxics. Let's start with the main cause of eutrophication in the Baltic Sea. Eutrophication is caused by an oversupply of nourishment. The Baltic Sea receives 30,000 tons of phosphorus and almost half a ton of nitrogen every year. A big part of that comes from natural sources, such as streams and rivers. However, about 3/4 are anthropogenic, mostly from sewage plants and industries, as well as leakages from farm and woodlands. The biggest human contribution comes from the farmlands, and the biggest industrial emissions come from the pulp and paper mills. Other important sources of nitrogen are combustion processes such as heating and traffic. Eutrophication can radically change the sea's ecosystem, as some species benefit from an oversupply of nourishments, while the competition becomes harder for others. They might decrease in scale or disappear completely. Degradation of organic matter takes up a lot of oxygen, which leads to oxygen-deficient waters and seabeds. This leads to a reduced amount of demersal species. In addition to eutrophication, algal blooming is also a big issue, and we're now going to hear from an expert in that field in our lab during an interview with one of our reporters. What is algal blooming and why is it happening?
So, the algal blooms are the rapid growth and build-up of phytoplankton. The algal blooming is included in one of the ecosystems in the Baltic Sea's water natural process. However, when we during the 80s started overfishing on cod in the Baltic Sea's water, that led to a chain reaction in the sea's animal life, and therefore the algal blooming became more severe. The thing that has gotten a mass occurrence in the Baltic Sea is called cyanobacteria and diatoms. They can both be produced in a large mass because of the high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, which is caused by eutrophication. Another cause of the increasing amount of cyanobacteria during the past few years is because of the pollution and global warming. Since the temperature is rising, the oceans get warmer and becomes a more fitting environment for the algal bloom.
What does the algal blooming lead to?
So, a consequence that has occurred due to the increasing amount of cyanobacteria and diatoms is that the water can be almost impossible to bathe in. The species that bloom in the Baltic Sea can produce a poison that can cause us liver damage, which can be fatal. And therefore it's recommended that you refrain yourself from bathing in the Baltic Sea during the summer when the cyanobacteria flourish the most. The cyanobacteria also sinks to the sea bottoms and form a layer, which in connections with its degradation leads to decreasing oxygen levels on the bottoms. The lowering levels of oxygen then leads to us having oxygen-deficient seabeds in the Baltic Sea. And because of the oxygen-deficient seabeds, the animal life in the Baltic Sea will decrease. The animals will be forced to flee and find another place to live in, or they will simply die.
In the studio with us today is an environmental toxic expert who is going to talk a bit about a different problem the Baltic Sea is facing. Can you tell us a little bit about that issue?
High levels of environmental toxins such as mercury, PCB and DDT have been found in bottom sediment along the Baltic coast. The substances have been used for a long time in connection with, among other things, wood industries. Concentrations of environmental pollutions are therefore most associated with old wood and paper industries. The mercury and chromium levels are currently the highest SGU has ever measured, and the level of PCB and DDT are also very high. These poisons are strongly associated with a number of serious environmental problems in the Baltic Sea. For example, high levels of dioxin in fish and fetal damage among many different species.
So to sum everything up, what has been done and what can we do to minimize the environmental problems the Baltic Sea is facing?
Several efforts have been made to address this problem. Among other things, more sewage plants have been built along the coasts, which has decreased the eutrophication problems. The ban against phosphate in detergents has also been introduced within the EU, as well as a ban against the environmental toxins PCB and DDT. Also, a tax on fertilizers and pesticides would lead to a more efficient use of nutrients. Promoting organic farming would also lead to a reduced amount of emissions.
Thank you for coming. This was everything on today's NNC News. We will be back with another environmental topic tomorrow at 8 a.m.